One of the really important things that I have to ascertain is, where do they sit in their willingness to break down their management structures? Because if they protect the management structures and the very things that have caused their poor workplace culture and retention issues and all these things that existed to begin with, well, if their desire is to protect those and not actually consider how can we change this to make it more human-centered, people-centered, well, then I actually can't help them.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton and I'm joined with the wonderful Ashleigh Moreland. How are you going today, Ash?
Hey guys, I'm awesome. I'm excited to chat today about
managers, leaders.
Versus leaders. Yeah. Which one are you? Hopefully you will have
more importantly, what would other people say you are?
Yeah. So isn't that funny? Because which one are you? Are you a manager or are you a leader? And how are you determining that? What would your team say you are?
It's more about, I would say, the desire to be one or the other, like a desire to be leader. Because I think intention, absolutely. Capabilities, I know we've spoken about that before.
Maybe even capacity.
All of this.
Points to the same stuff, doesn't it?
But just on the top of the show, what's better? Being a manager or a leader? I mean, in my mind, I always gravitate to the leader side of things because I feel as though it's a bit more... It's a bit more something that you'd want to attain, leadership over management. Because being painted in a fairly... I mean, it can be painted in a dark brush, right?
Yeah.
Managers yell, leaders show, and all of that type of stuff. LinkedIn, inspirational leadership stuff everywhere. But I think there's a place for both. And there's also negatives to both as well. But it's an incredible one because everything is a people business, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And really, when you say which one's better, there's pros and cons to both. And I think we actually need to have a little bit of a middle ground there, right? But there's this big, and again, it's almost like patriarchy, hierarchical control. And this is where systemic culture. So my background was in academia. And ironically, I feel like my time in academia in a very broken hierarchical systemic management structure prepared me and equipped me and trained me for the leadership development that I do now for organizations and businesses. Because that in a structure that big and that masculine dominant, and I don't mean male dominant, although there's probably an element of that, I really mean masculine dominant, where it is more around control. It's more around the practicalities and tasks and efficiency and policies and procedures and all of those kinds of things, but it's lacking the human element.
Well, I think most business at its core is masculine.
To an extent, yeah.
Well, you think about it, governance.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that nurturing? How is that, loving?
Systemically, yes. Yeah, I agree.
The whole, to be in any business that is recognized by any agency in any country, there's governance. There's these things that you have to do. So at its core, it's about following the rules, doing that, obedience. And yes, it is to protect people from shady things being done, 100%. But, it's sort of like the rise of the entrepreneur is kind of what I see is almost the first step into a more feminine way of doing business because
there's an element of consciousness and purpose now, isn't there? Although I question this because I feel like I live under a rock to an extent, because although I've had a lot of exposure when I was an employee to very toxic workplaces, and not toxic by anyone's fault. It was probably more
The culture.
systemically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
The culture.
systemically
Yeah.
toxic, because of the management structures and the lack of actual understanding of the fact that the people are not just names in boxes, they're actual humans that are dynamic and have a need for innovation and creativity and all these things, right? But as an entrepreneur, I am really fortunate to be surrounded by a whole heap of very purpose-led, highly conscious entrepreneurs who really are all about leadership development. And when I'm having conversations with businesses about whether or not I'll work with them, one of the really important things that I have to ascertain is, where do they sit in their willingness to break down their management structures? Because if they protect the management structures and the very things that have caused their poor workplace culture and retention issues and all these things that existed to begin with, well, if their desire is to protect those and not actually consider how can we change this to make it more human-centered, people-centered, well, then I actually can't help them. Because it's kind of like, I gave this as feedback once in a workplace like survey, and I said, it's like trying to help a person experiencing domestic violence, trying to support them, trying to help them, trying to encourage them, trying to nurture them, but not doing anything to remove them from their abuser. And that was confronting. It was like a pretty confronting example to give. But until the structure was no longer abusive and systemically resulting in burnout, because it completely missed the point that people are actual humans, empowering the team, empowering the people on the ground, pretty much the only thing that led to is a mass exodus. I think in one department, all but maybe 2 people left at one point.
Well, it begs a question, right? Because when you say you have this systemic culture, right, and then there's that sense of don't fix what's not broken. And again, that's a perception based on these managers and also,
how are we measuring broken? Like, is that, if we're meeting our KPIs, if we're meeting our revenue targets, if we're
about to say it's more revenue based, like
right,
KPIs. It doesn't matter what business you're in. KPIs fly out the window as long as you're making revenue.
Yeah.
And then the biggest thing that gets focused on is KPIs when you're trying to turn things around.
Yes, isn't that funny? Imagine if you focused on your people, the KPIs would take care of themselves.
Well, exactly. And so you start to look at, and then you've got these, the whole leadership structure, which is based on, again, revenue, because...
is it leadership structure or is it management structure?
Management, we'll just
say about our words, because...
the structure, yeah?
Yeah, it's a hierarchy.
That if people had an abundance of money, they wouldn't be cutting back. No one goes to work wanting to be stressed out of their brains. No one goes to work wanting to have to do the work of 3 people and argue with 4 people. There is everyone, if they had the amount of money within the business to do things properly, people would enjoy it as long as they were making the revenue. So everything that I've particularly seen comes down to, we don't have the budget for it. That's not it's not economically viable. But they all talk the big talks, and there's a big aspirational posters on the wall about, customers are number one. It's all about customer experience.
It's like aspirational things, aren't they? We're aspiring. It's like values. We're aspiring to these values, but they're not living it.
That's right, because the actions are sort of based on financial limits. Like anyone could have an example of, in their workplace, if money was no object, what would you change? They would absolutely change it, and they would probably add more things to make people happier. The customer's happier. Because their customers are happier, the staff's going to be happier.
Yeah.
If the staff's happier, the customers are going to be happier too. Because
Isn't that interesting? So I did something with a business that I worked with, I think it was last year. And we just basically wrote down all the different tasks that had to be done for the business to operate. And we got all the staff to actually go through, and there were 3 options. It was, I love this task. I absolutely despise this task. And neutral. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I'll do it if I have to.
Yep.
Whatever. And what we got people to do is actually just go through and rate, where do you sit for each of these tasks? And the ironic thing was that every single task, maybe bar like 1 or 2, had people who said they absolutely loved it. And this, when we bring in a people-centered approach, it's acknowledging that different strokes for different folks, right? There are certain things that some people love and other people look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing ever. And we think that just because it's in someone's job description, then they have to do it, even though it might be in there, I absolutely despise this one little thing. But there's someone else who has a talent and skill set that looks at that little thing and goes, oh my gosh, spreadsheets. Yeah. Awesome. Right. And so the crazy thing is, the crazy thing is that it actually changed nothing. It cost them absolutely nothing other than shuffling responsibilities in people's roles so that the people who in their workplace did more of the things that they absolutely loved, less of the things that they absolutely hated, and the things that were neutral just got divvied up based on workload availability and capacity.
Love it.
And so nothing else changed. That it didn't require further allocation of resources. It didn't require anything else. It was just an understanding of, this is what you perceive your skill set to be. This is where your passions lie. Let's get you working in your zone of genius. And just by doing that, culture improved. People were happier to come to work because they were doing less of the things that made their lives a living hell. They were doing more of the things that challenged them in a healthy way, that breathed life into them and inspired them and motivated them and excited them. That is such a limiting belief, to think that the only way we can improve culture is if we spend bucket tons of money and we hire more people, or if it's a workload issue. More often than not, from my observation, workload, if people were doing more of the things that lit them up and less of the things that drained them, the workload gets done.
Oh, look, I agree with what you're saying when it comes to, if you get people to do what they love. Absolutely. I've been in too many workplaces where it doesn't matter how much you love your job, there's simply not enough resources to get what you need done. Yeah. And normally it's a financial constraint. And so that adds pressure, and then that adds more and more. But I guess what when we're talking about the management versus leadership, what's better in all of that is, how do you deal with the cards that you've got? Because we could hypothesize, we could dream, we could do all of these things to sort of say, well, the simple solution is get investors in and get a load of money so that you can fix all your problems. No, that's not going to happen. So how do we deal with it? And I guess let's talk about management.
All right.
Let's
start with management.
Let's dive into management, right? Because this is the word that is used predominantly.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to upper management, middle management.
And so just in that alone, there's hierarchy. And the hierarchy is played out. So it's a real, management is a top-down approach, where there's tasks assigned, there's direct reports, all those kinds of things. But it's about control and basically efficiency, and you've got your policies and procedures and everything happens the way it should. Not saying that policies and procedures are not important. They absolutely are.
Absolutely.
Yes, but it's much more rigid and almost like
it's got the connotation.
do as I say, and don't think for yourself. Just get the job done, and it doesn't matter what it takes.
Because it's almost like it's a perception. It's a connotation that's been drummed into us about management. In my mind, it's been drummed into me. Managers are they have authority and power.
Yes.
But can be good leaders of people, or don't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, they just get the job done. It's relentless. I remember using an example where we had a manager once who was cutthroat, just absolutely cutthroat, and just genuinely seemed like the broad perception was they were so cutthroat, they just didn't care about the people as long as the job got done, no matter what, even if you were, hung out to dry. We had a change of management, and the person that came in still obviously had KPIs and had to get the job done, but that it was more relational. And it's a crazy example because, like you were saying before, we really were under-resourced. But the way that I explained it was, it would be the first manager, if we were absolutely completely burnt out and were about to die, that person would be kind of like, shut up and die quietly in the corner. Don't be so noisy while you're dying. Whereas the second manager still couldn't do much more without additional resources and without anything else. So we still had similar issues, but it was more relational and we felt more seen, more heard. There was more people focus. And in that case, I was kind of like, well, at least they really care that I'm dying. Like, they'll get me a pillow and a blanket and make sure I'm comfortable. But their hands were tied because there's all these levels of management that sat above them that really rate limited their capacity to actually be able to do anything more meaningful to help us. But at least there was that element of really feeling like I matter enough for you to care.
Yeah, and just I think, and people would be able to relate to this, they may not like the people necessarily above them or above those people that are above them, but boy, they love working with the people around them. And that makes it a whole lot, like a much better experience.
Yeah.
Because you rally together. And it's not necessarily because of the manager in this sense. It's about the fact that the individuals and the peers rally around each other to get the job done. Yeah. And so
that's relational.
Absolutely.
And I think this is an important point. I'm reminded of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I used to use this example a lot in the groups that I was leading, that if you completely deconstructed the human body, and this is relevant because I used to be in anatomy field, we used to teach anatomy, so if you completely deconstructed the human body and you had lungs and heart and liver and all the organs and the physical structure, the skeleton, the muscles, everything, and they were all laid out, every single ingredient or structure that goes into the physical human body was all laid out. You've got all the parts. But it doesn't actually matter unless you make it whole. It all has to combine together. The lungs actually can't help us unless it's got the heart to pump the blood to them to oxygenate them.
Yeah.
Right? So it's about how do we actually work together, determine what functions and what contributions each of those organs has, the interconnections and interdependence of all of those things. And the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so when you were talking just then about how you might have a leader who's stuck in this structure, where the structure and systemically is management based and hierarchical and very limited in those ways, but the leader has intentions of connection and bringing together the whole and all those kinds of things. Well, that's going to be really beneficial. But again, systemically, we have this much, much, much bigger beast.
100%. And for myself, when you're a good leader, you can manage.
Yeah.
And some people might say, and now we're talking semantics, that a good manager can also lead. But
Yeah.
it's about flipping the qualities of what's required at the time based
And
on,
priorities? Would you say it's a priorities thing?
well, it's a priority based on what the company needs or the people around you need. Because ultimately, when we're talking about either managing or leading, we're talking about common objectives or goals. So in a workplace, it's about doing your job so that money comes in the door to pay for expenses and to provide a service or a good to someone.
Yeah.
When it comes to leading a group of people, whether it be a head juror in court or whether it's whatever, or a team, it's about getting that objective done. And so, what do those people need and where do you play them in the best part? But again, if we go back to, and I think this conversation will be more broadly around employment based and in the workplace, that when you need to manage is when you need to consolidate change. That is the most effective time to be a manager, because I think we spoke off camera about when you're leading, if you're in a perpetual state of leadership, and this is again where some entrepreneurs, it becomes the end of them, they don't know when to stop. And
As in they
so
don't know when to actually
consolidate.
tighten tighten the reins and step into more
Well,
of a
stop
management.
innovating. Like there's this thing where, like you can imagine, some of the best entrepreneurs have had to resign as CEOs at some point because they've built something from the ground up, which requires that drive, requires the innovation, requires that whole mindset of living and breathing and driving this sort of message. And when it comes to, okay, we've done that, and now we need to consolidate it. We now need to properly monetize it, and we need to grow the the revenue. And it's no longer about creating a new product on the product in the product and da da da. It's about doing what we've done before correctly. It's a little bit boring
Yeah.
for the entrepreneur. So again,
Yeah.
from a leadership to management point of view, you need to know when to sort of switch gears
Yeah.
and
Isn't
get
that
it
interesting?
in.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is along the lines of a leader without management lacks focus, but a manager without leadership might lack relationship, inspiration, innovation. So they kind of go hand in hand.
Well, it's almost like it's they call it, this is a cricketing term for everyone that loves the cricketing terms, right? Especially in the Test match. It's called the Night's Watchman. It's the batter that, the batsman that at the end of day one, day two, whatever, then are the first batsman in the morning because they're not out. It's essentially making sure everything that's supposed to be done gets done. It doesn't require the constant change because, again, you need to settle, you need to consolidate, you need to find surety, you need to let things that have been implemented have time to either work or not work,
Yeah.
and then work into that feedback loop as opposed to constantly going for the next idea, next idea, next idea, next idea, from an entrepreneurial point of view. But
Yeah.
from a leadership point of view, there are some similarities. From a leadership point of view, you go from fixing, let's just say you come in and there's a mess. You clean the mess up. As a leader, you're generally looking for the next mess. So,
Ooh. See, maybe I misinterpreted what you said, but I would see a manager as being the one who takes responsibility for cleaning the mess up, whereas a leader might equip and empower others to be able to be able to clean the mess up
yeah,
themselves. That,
I think you're right, because I think I was going on a slight tangent, probably the wrong way. But
yeah.
yes, because for me, a leader's able to change structures, is to be able
Yeah,
to be
there's
to
adaptability, right? There's
yeah.
adaptability, there's resilience, there's
Mm.
um, being able to empower and inspire others, even right down to mistakes. I see management might be more punitive in the face of mistakes. It might see mistakes as costly and things like that, whereas a leader would, with a growth mindset and with that coaching and mentoring capacity, a leader would be able to reframe, well, what is there to learn through that mistake? I see lots more, because management's really performance driven, whereas leadership is growth.
Well, it's in my mind, a good manager follows the rules, and that's what they do. They are there.
Structured processes,
Yeah,
task execution.
and that is really good when you're in a consolidating phase. When you're consolidating from growth, because every part of growth you need to have a consolidation phase.
Yeah.
You're never on a constant growth, even though it may look at it from a distance. It's up and down as you're heading up, and so you really need that time to be able to just sort of sit there and go through it. Where, but let me give you an example, and I learned this when I was in the automotive days, and I had this story given to me by Toyota. And in Toyota, in their factories, they have massive factories. And look, most car automotive manufacturers have massive dealerships. But the thing about Toyota is they prioritize quality and reliability above everything else.
Yeah.
And that starts from the production floor. Okay. And in one of their biggest factories in the US, they drive into all of their employees. If you see something going down the line that doesn't represent reliability and consistency, you need to hit the button and stop the line, because you need to fix it.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly moving at a slow rate, but constantly moving. Now, one thing that they don't share with their employees is how much it costs to have that line stopped for 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because it's not relevant. It's not relevant to the point about our number one priority is encouraging and focusing on people to say reliability is the utmost importance.
Comes down to values, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Where I loved that, because it's sort of like, now imagine if you had that exact same scenario, which our values are reliability, quality, consistency, but if the line is stopped for a minute, that's going to cost us $1 million for every minute. Big difference. Like, I don't know what it costs.
Like an undertone of threat in a sense, isn't it?
Well, but it's not actually. It's counterintuitive.
It is, absolutely.
Because it's so,
you're adding a layer of, but I don't want to cost them $1 million, because then it's my fault that it's cost $1 million. And
exactly. Yeah. And so it's really important around the actions that it comes. And I saw real leadership in that one example. We don't know how much it costs to stop the line, and they'll never know. But the focus is reliability, consistency, and getting it right.
Yeah.
And so what, in my mind, it's not unreasonable for a manager to say all of those things, but also say, when that line stops, it costs us X amount of hundreds of thousands, millions, whatever. Now suddenly you're inadvertently putting the thought into that person, is this $1 million problem? And now that person's having to guess.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if 3 or 4 or 5 of those cars go through, it could very well end up into a tens of millions of dollars of a problem. But again, leadership is really about the person that made that decision was a leader, because what they're saying is, I will worry about the financial side if you worry about that.
Right? And that's empowering. That's 100%. There's a motivation there because it's values driven.
Yes.
And that is absolutely leadership behavior.
as opposed to a manager who'd be worried about how many line stoppages they had this month.
Yeah. Although, having said that, I think you and I had this discussion previously, maybe off air, but how, because I think one of the things I raised is that when it comes to management, there is like a real focus on policies and procedures and guidelines and all that sort of stuff, but also how important that actually is, because that data, I mean, if they're leading and saying, yep, we really value reliability and all those things that you mentioned, but then stick their head in the sand and never actually look at the data, well, then they are responsible for the increased line stoppages, right? But perhaps if they led by empowering the team and then looked at the data, that looking at the data is a management of an issue, right? So I think there is so much overlap here between the management and leadership. And I think even when it comes to when I'm doing leadership development or leadership coaching, we are quite often at the top of the hierarchy. Quite often we're very equipped to be a manager, not great at leadership, because leadership is relational. It's, as I said before, it's inspiring, it's motivating, it's coaching and mentoring. That requires regulation. It requires connection. It requires, even co-regulation when there's problems. But it's then balancing, well, how do I balance these leadership characteristics and these leadership traits of, making decisions, really leaning into our intuition and discernment and basing it on a vision and having real deep understanding and relationship with people, and then balancing that with management. Because I've seen leaders so people focused that it's actually cost their organization significantly, where, but they're a really nice person, completely not competent, making mistakes all the time, completely disrespecting and disregarding boundaries, absolutely taking the mickey. But this person who's so people focused, which is a leadership quality, hasn't had the capacity to manage that situation, which is then compromising the rest of the team, and it's compromising the outcomes, the data. And so it's not to say that one's bad and the other's good, but if too much of one without the balancing of the other, then that can be bad. I've seen businesses literally go bust because of it.
Well, I think the biggest quality, regardless if you're a leader or a manager, but for me, again, I tend to feel as though a leader can be both, a leader and manager.
Yeah, well, they have to be.
Yeah, and I think the core difference, as you were saying, it sort of came to me, the difference between a great leader and an effective manager is their ability to sit in discomfort, is their ability to be uncomfortable. And if they can do that, as opposed to, let's just say, delegating their uncomfortability. So for example, when you just talked about that great person who's not doing their job, a leader would have to either performance manage them into someone that they can be actively participating, or manage them out of the business.
Exactly.
And
Both
that's,
of which require management qualities and management traits.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's being okay to be uncomfortable in that. Or when it comes to being a leader and looking around and going, how do I fix the culture? As opposed to someone looking around and going, this company would be so much better if the culture was better.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah. So solutions focused as opposed to problems focused.
Well, it's a reflection of like what have I done? How am I responsible? Because coming back to culture, a manager or someone who's just going to delegate their responsibility will simply say, all of you are responsible for the culture here. And the finger's just wagging and
Yes.
everybody else.
We had
Where,
this conversation previously around
yeah,
self-responsibility versus like, oh, it's because they didn't do their job right, or because they did that, or because they made this mistake, or whatever.
and these
But
all could be, and these are all probably very true statements. Yes, 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 and yes.
yes,
But as a leader, you would look at it and go, the culture is a reflection of all of our individual actions put into one. And so culture is not something you change overnight. So it's then, how do you set the example to then allow them to follow and to have it change?
yeah,
And what you're allowing to happen
yes.
versus what are you not allowing to happen.
Yeah, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, and I think on
Love that one.
on the self responsibility thing, I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode, even around relationships, right? So I might sit there and go, oh, but my husband did this and this and this, and he did that, and he all this for 8 years, and I could make it all about him and his fault, and I'm the victim, but if I, for 1 second, turn around and look at the role that I played in that, I go, well, I chose to do that for 8 years. I could have left at any time. I could have ended it at any time. So there's an element of self-responsibility that has to come in there. And even in my own business, it was a really profound moment for me, actually, when I really saw growth in my leadership, was for a longer period of time than what should have happened. I had a hire that was just relentlessly making mistakes, and there were issues. There were performance-based issues. And even though I continued to attempt to lead and upskill and support and guide and all those kinds of things, the mistakes and issues and performance wasn't improving at the rate that it needed to. And so all this time went by, and by the end of it, I was at risk of entering into frustration at the other person, that they had cost me this, and that they had let me down in this way, and that they had done that. Yeah. But when I really turned around and looked at it, I knew there were problems months ago. And it was my choice to keep them on. I didn't performance manage them well enough. When I go back to even interviewing them, I wasn't even super clear on what I needed from them. So they're kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what stuck. Right?
Gotcha.
So there were so many things that I could learn about that there from a leadership perspective, where there was a whole level of self-responsibility. And so when I have business owners or people in a management position or a leadership position, and I'm working with them, we always look at how their stuff is playing out in the dynamic of their leadership. Why are you not having that conversation? Oh, because I don't want to upset them. Okay, that's your stuff. That fear of letting people down, that's your stuff. We can resolve that, and we can equip you to be able to have
That's uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yes, it's being able to sit in the discomfort. Why are you not on top of your numbers? Oh, I've never been good at numbers. Well, that's a you problem. So let's equip you, let's support you, let's facilitate you to improve that skill set. But pretty much nothing that happens do we ever escape some element of responsibility. And that's something that I've had to learn, even as a business owner myself. And it's something that I often have to guide leaders to, in order to be able to take that responsibility and see how they can learn and grow to be able to inspire change in others.
And I think that's really important, what you just said there, inspiration.
Yeah.
Because again, when we're talking about the leadership and management in the workplace context, everyone's come together because there's money involved, right? Inspiration is getting someone to turn up when they're not being paid.
Yes.
And so if you can create that sort of inspiration, now
it's purpose. It's
why.
Kind of, why are we here beyond just making revenue?
And it's difficult because, again, like we're talking about a workplace that, and a lot of people aren't sort of living their passion at the moment, as they're starting to wake up to the fact that there is actually a life where you can live your passion and be rewarded and be abundant with it. but it's kind of difficult, and that's what I think a leader can do, regardless of what's going on. And I'm going to hone my message in right at the tail end of the show.
Yeah.
The essence of a leader is exactly what you said before: is the ability to inspire people to do things.
Yep.
It's not to force them. It's not to bribe them. It's not to give them a pay rise and all of those things. Yes, everyone needs to be properly rewarded for their time. But it's that in an essence, as opposed to the old Macbeth, when everyone, they didn't respect him, they feared him, but as soon as he lost power, they'll be happy to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And so, it's looking at how you can find that inspiration, and it's very difficult. I'm going to say very, very difficult to be inspirational when you are simply not inspired yourself.
100%. And that is it's so important to be connected to your why. What's your purpose? This came up just recently. I think it was like last week, where the need to be connected to a purpose greater than just showing up to earn money and pay the bills. There's so much more than that. And some of the examples that I gave, like imagine an electrical company and everyone just rocks up because they think they're just an electrician. They go and do the job, get their money, pay their bills, and rinse and repeat. But what if their purpose was to provide an essential service that kept families safe, warm, and entertained?
That actually sounds like last episode. How do we, change our perception?
Yeah, a hairdresser. A hairdresser's not just a hairdresser. A hairdresser supports women to actually feel amazing in their bodies and improve their sense of self, because, I'm reminded of my first job as a sandwich artist at Subway. We didn't just rock up and make sandwiches. We were a sandwich artist. And so I think about that and I go, wow, a hairdresser is someone who allows people to express their personality through hair artistry.
Yeah.
Like, think of a cleaner. One of my friends used to feel, she was cleaning and she used to feel like people saw her as the bottom of the barrel. And I'm like, yeah, but the perception there is that you're just a cleaner. Now reframe it as you provide a refreshing and hygienic space that supports the physical, mental, and emotional health of your clients. Now all of a sudden, I've got goosebumps. There's a greater why and there's a purpose behind it. How is the world a better place by me doing this beyond money?
Or just looking at, don't be focused on what brings you passion. Don't be focused on if your passion is going to be judged by someone differently. So if you love cleaning, do it. If you love cooking, do it. Don't be brought down by that. But if you're cleaning and you absolutely hate it, and you're only doing it because you think that's the only thing you're capable of doing, okay, now we need to have a bit more of a discussion, because there's some other things for you to look at.
Yeah.
But again, how do you inspire a group of cleaners? Well, it's not the most inspirational job because it is very much a rinse and repeat, pardon the pun. But it's there has to be ways in which you can do it, and it'll be different in every way. It doesn't mean it's going to be inspirational like in the movies just before, I'm going back to Independence Day, where the aliens had just shot the White House and the president was standing there talking about how our, really old equipment's going to beat the aliens, and, it's like a long 4-minute speech. It's probably not going to be anything like that, but there are moments that you can do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a leader, in those cases, a manager is being task focused. It's just get the job done. Whereas a leader is connect to the why. Why are we here doing it? Why are you part of this? And this is a revelation that I even had in my own life, in my own business recently, was even with contractors. I saw a gap in a skill set in my business that I needed help with. I didn't have the skills. I was going to outsource it because purely it's a time versus money trade-off. Now, manager me wanted to just look at the practicalities. Do you have the skill set? Can you do it? Is there a track record of that? Can you meet these KPIs in this time frame and turn it around and get the job done? And I was feeling really disconnected and dissatisfied with this process. I felt like I was being let down a lot. And what I realized is that I had saved leadership just for the people internal in my organization, as opposed to having leadership with anyone engaged with the organization. And so the difference of that was actually not just looking at competencies and skill sets to fill the gap, but actually looking at what their heart posture was. Why is contributing to our purpose important for you? Why is actually investing your time, aside from money? Obviously, there's financial gain here for you because you're going to get the job. But why is this job important to you? And what do you get out of it for moving us closer towards our mission and our purpose and our vision? Because it's impacting the lives of people all around the world. And as soon as that happened for me, as soon as I realized, oh my gosh, that's the missing piece, because then it's about inspiring them to come and join us on our mission, as opposed to managing someone who's doing a task for me. It was so different.
That's a great one.
Oh, what a great, I reckon that's probably a great place to end.
Absolutely. We could keep on going, but yeah, you're right. It's not just internal. It's not just in your contractors. It's the way you are. It's about allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and having uncomfortable discussions. It's about setting boundaries.
Yeah.
It's about knowing what you'll tolerate, what you expect, knowing where you want to go, what brings you passion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all very common themes in a lot of our episodes. So
absolutely. It'd be like someone coming up to me saying, oh, I heard you're an amazing coach. I'm looking for a coach. I'm looking for a coach to help me earn $100 million. I'm probably not your coach. But if you came to me and said, oh, I'm looking for a coach. I want someone to help me on my mission to blah, 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 insert really meaningful purpose here.
Well, I just want to find myself and heal my traumas. You know, then that'd be the greatest gift anyone could have.
That's a process, not an outcome. So what might be an outcome of that? Oh my gosh, I want to be able to have some impact on the world.
I want to find my purpose.
So much more meaningful to me. It would not be fulfilling work for me to rock up, regardless of how much I was getting paid, just to help someone earn hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not meaningful for me. But if I partner with them on their purpose as to why, what are you going to do with that? How is that going to impact people? Then, oh, heck yeah, I can be inspired by that.
Love it. Well, guys and girls, I hope you found this episode a little bit insightful. Drop in the comments. What do you think? Do you agree with our versions of management versus leadership and vice versa? Do you have anything else you want to add to it? Would love to hear from you. But until then, I reckon we'll call it for this episode, Ash. Bye-bye.
See you later.